From Washington, the McLaughlin Group, the American original. For over 3 decades, the sharpest minds, best sources, hardest talk.
Welcome to another edition of the McLaughlin Group from our various locales at our homes and with our families, hopefully keeping safe. And we hope you're keeping safe as well. Today we have our familiar faces, Pat Buchanan, Eleanor Clifton, Clarence Page, and joining us is Sir Michael Singleton, a friend of the show and a conservative strategist. And on that note, we should get to our first issue, which is issue 1, the North and the South.
It's going to be very limited in scope, basic operations. We're talking about a few businesses that I closed down to help flatten the curve, which we have done in our state. But for us to continue to ask them to do that while they lose everything, quite honestly, there are a lot of civil repercussions of that.
Georgia this week moved to reopen certain businesses, including salons and bowling alleys. And while some saluted Governor Kemp for his courage, others condemned his action as unbound from public health needs. But as the coronavirus pandemic rumbles on, we are seeing a separation in attitudes between southern states wanting to lift the lockdown and northern states insisting it must sustain.
Pat, how do you see this divide playing out between North and South? Do you think it will sustain, or do you think we might find some renewed unity between the states in terms of how to deal with this crisis?
I don't think we're going to find exact unity, but I do think we're going to find general consensus and general common ground from left to right. But Tom, the great tragedy here, which we've seen, is that in April and March, some 58,000 Americans will have died, as many as died in 7 years in Vietnam. Secondly, we now have in about 4 weeks, 26 million unemployed Americans. And that's the terrible news. The good news is that the curve has flattened, that the number of dead, the number of hospitalizations, numbers in the ICUs, they've come over the top and they've started down. The Trump administration has a program, has an agenda, which almost everybody's agreed to. The governor of Georgia's overdone it, but I think we're moving in the right direction. And I think when Governor Cuomo indicated that the number of New York folks who have been afflicted with the virus may be 10 times as high as they thought, which means the lethality of the virus is not as great as we thought it was.
Well, I agree with Pat on one statement, and that is that the governor of Georgia has gone too far.
Pat, how do you see this divide playing out? Do you think we'll see increasing divisions between governors in the southern states?
No, I'm not sure that we will, Tom. I think what we're going to see is sort of compromise and consensus generally. But I think the good news here is that we've straightened out the curve to a degree. You've got the number of deaths, the number of admissions to the ICU are down. You got the number of folks leaving the hospitals are up. I think we're over the top and coming down. And I think there's going to be collisions, but governors will make decisions for their states. Some of them will be resisted and opposed, but they will face the consequences of the people.
I think we're seeing insurrection between, or civil war, if you will, between the governors and the president. The Georgia governor went too far, but he was egged on by the president, who tweeted "liberate" and was urging on these protests. And so Governor Kemp opens up massage parlors and bowling alleys, which makes absolutely no sense. And then the president this week, actually on I guess it was Wednesday, says that Governor Kemp has gone too far, and he strongly disagrees with him. So the president is trying to have it both ways. And you have the Michigan Governor Whitmer, who is being vilified mainly by the right, because she shut down seed stores and they can't buy flowers to plant in their yard. And she, who is a contender to possibly be a presidential running mate, says that Michigan is 10th in population and they are 3rd in the number of coronavirus infections. So she's got to take strong steps.
Clarence.
Well, Tom, I wish it was as simple as just North and South, but we're finding that this is really a difference of cultural and political leanings. There are the states like Georgia and other southern states tend to be more conservative, tend to be more Republican, but even so, we have President Trump, who came out criticizing the Georgia governor's plan, saying that that's too soon. Certainly, President Trump is looking at the polls, which show most Americans agree that it's too soon. Everybody wants to end this whole quarantine, if you will. But nobody wants to do it too quickly.
Sure, Michael.
I mean, Tom, look, I think when you compare northern states to southern states, major cities like New York to some smaller southern cities, I mean, you have to keep in mind population density obviously is going to have a significant impact on how wide and varied the virus spreads and how quickly it spreads. At the same time, you also have to keep in mind that many individuals who live in northern states in comparison to southern states where the income is a little lower, they may have the economic means, if you will, to stay at home for several months at a time, where many people in the South, many people in rural parts of certain states, Tom, are saying, we need to get back to work. The little bit of money that the government has approved, yes, we are thankful for, but our livelihoods are on the line here. The reality is we have to open up at least some sectors of the economy, because my fear is if, as Eleanor pointed out, this thing spreads like wildfire this fall because of influenza, we could find ourselves in a depression if we have to shut down for several months again, only months away from now. So those things have to be taken into consideration.
Michael, we are in a depression when you got 26 million unemployed. And I can tell you, we're moving toward May and everybody is pretty much going to agree, I think, that we don't open up to any large degree until you meet the guidelines, until you hit May. But by then, what your Michael said, I mean, the hardships, the people having difficulty getting food, the troubles in homes and things. This is going to go beyond these protest movements, and more people are going to speak out and demand to open up their states before June. And Democratic governors, as well as Republican governors, I can tell you, are going to start moving in that direction.
There is a responsible way to unwind or to wind up the economy, and that is testing. The original sin of this whole pandemic is the fact that we didn't get on the testing bandwagon soon enough. Now the Congress
we're not going to test 300 million Americans. The country's going to open up.
I get to finish, excuse me. $25 billion the Congress just voted for corona testing. And every public health official, every governor will tell you that without ramping up testing and being able to know where this virus is, who's had it, where's safe, you cannot ask people to go back to work safely. And companies don't want, they want Congress to give them immunity from lawsuits if people get sick. And Congress isn't going to pass that. So everybody is saying, go slow. And I think that's appropriate. This can be done and it will be done, but it has to be done responsibly. And with also Elizabeth Warren and a Democratic rep from Michigan, Andy Levin, have a proposal for a containment corps. It's the new era's Peace Corps.
Well, yeah, we're just beginning to get more testing. Certainly, virtually everybody agrees that we need more, but it's going to take a little while to catch up on that as well. And there's a lot of headlines this week from the protests that were popping up around the country, but I don't think those are really going to go anywhere, really, because as I mentioned, most people all agree that, yeah, we do want to get back to work, but we want to get back to work and not get sick.
Sure, Michael, let me ask you a question here. One of the challenges I think conservatives are grappling with is the notion that some on the left, not all, but some on the left see this as a unique opportunity to reshape the economy into a more state-controlled system, one towards the European model, perhaps. Do you think that is guiding some of the thinking behind governors like Kemp in Georgia, and perhaps even people in the White House who are concerned about President Trump's re-election prospects because of the economic downturn, but also about the broader economic ramifications in terms of the structure of the American economy?
Tom, that's a perfect question. I think it's a combination of two things. I think you have Republican governors who are listening to people in their states, particularly their constituents who voted for them, who elected them. And I do also think you may have some Republican governors who are looking at this from an ideological perspective, and they're listening to people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who, granted, she's still young, but her influence is expansive. I would argue she is the future of the Democratic Party, and so are her ideas. And when you listen to someone like her who's saying, well, this is a great opportunity to redo everything and start completely over again for a quote unquote better system that's geared more towards the workers, then as a conservative, you must wonder what type of system is she talking about? And is she sort of alluding to your question, a more European style system, which I would argue the vast majority of Americans do not want?
Let me tell you where the crunch is going to come, and I have to give away my prediction. Eleanor alluded to it. The states and some of the Democratic cities with the Democratic mayors and governors are coming in for big bailouts for state governments, which were bankrupt before this and horribly run, like the state of Illinois, and they're going to want the federal taxpayers to bail them out. Mitch McConnell says, how about going into bankruptcy court and working it out there? I think there's going to be a real push coming up to bail out these states and these cities and these mayors and these governors. And I think the Republicans are going to be on the defensive. And Donald Trump's going to have to make a decision as to whether or not he's really going to push to save those governments from the bankruptcy some of them deserve.
So the fight's already brewing, and I agree on that. But it's not going to be that easily settled. Each state has to be looked at individually. You're right about Illinois, and we've got arguments going on back in that state, among others, over this very issue. But who's going to get bailed out and who won't? I suspect that Washington's going to look, especially President Trump is going to be looking at what party those governors and what's the possibility of him being able to carry those states in November, which is not the way to really analyze a problem, but this is an election year. And by the way, sure, Michael, with all due respect, I'm amazed that conservatives spend so much more time listening to AOC than liberals and Democrats do, you know? I mean, every time I turn around, somebody say, you see what AOC said today? No, I didn't. I mean,
AOC.
Let's go to Eleanor.
I wanted to go back to that as well. I mean, that's the Republican fantasy that AOC will be, creating the platform and running the campaign. Give it up. That's not going to happen. But I want to focus on the protest. The protest was started by gun rights people, basically people who think the NRA is too liberal. And other groups have sort of jumped on. And it's a real, the Proud Boys, the white nationalists, they're carrying their Confederate flags and all of that. They're a very, very small minority. And they're also being funded by Republican benefactors because it does play into all of the grievances that Trump is going to play on in order to get reelected. So you cannot separate the way he's handling the coronavirus from the way he sees his path to reelection. And that's
let me respond to that. Eleanor's correct in that there's no doubt about it. There's some conservative and militant activists who are in some of these demonstrations. But you go through one more week to May 1, you go to the middle of May, 2 more weeks, and you're going to find enormous pressure growing in middle America saying, look, it is like a war, and we've lost tens of thousands of our people. But we don't surrender. We don't hide in our homes. We got to rebuild our economy. We can't let them smash and destroy the greatest economy in the world. And once the curve comes to the point where the deaths are diminishing and the incidents of disease are diminishing, I think the demands are going to grow.
Okay. All right. On that, we're going to move on. We're going to move on to issue 2. Green card hold.
I think it's very strong, obviously, and it's countrywide as opposed to specifically like China or some of the other ones that I've shut down. We're going to see, and you'll see a very accurate definition tomorrow after it's completed by the attorneys.
After flirting with a much broader immigration ban, President Trump signed an executive order this week banning new green card admissions for 60 days. The ban does not apply to existing green card holders or to temporary workers. But perhaps Mr. Trump's intent here is not specifically about coronavirus border protections. Instead, some say the president is looking to galvanize his immigration-skeptical base before November.
Eleanor, do you think this is about the November election, or is it, as the president says, about protecting American jobs in the specific condition of the coronavirus crisis?
This is a mosquito-sized policy proposal. It's a nothing burger. It is basically just to send the message to his base who want to know that he's going to run on immigration, that he's building the wall. He even managed to get that into the coronavirus briefing one day this week. He's building the wall. He's going to lock everybody out. Remember, he shut out China. He shut out China after 420,000 people came in. So this is political messaging. It is not serious immigration policy.
Tom, 80% of the American people support what he did on immigration. I agree that he took a long time to do it. I mean, anybody that would bring in immigrants in the tens of thousands or scores of thousands into a country with 26 million unemployed Americans, I mean, that is an example of liberal fanaticism.
But his policy doesn't really address that. His policy addresses a minute amount of people for 60 days. It is.
Well, Eleanor, he's got China closed.
China's not closed. We've had tens of thousands of immigrants since he issued his order. And you know why this order is so limited, so small? Because he's already limited immigration since he got into office. There's not that much more left to limit.
Sure, Michael, your thoughts.
Well, look, I think the president should have did this, Tom, a lot sooner. I think when anytime there's a pandemic, the number one thing you want to do, and I talked to a lot of former military individuals about this, is you have to contain it. Containment is number one. And one of the quickest ways to contain something is to make sure that there aren't people coming in and people aren't going out. And that's something that I would argue the administration, just to be frank, really failed on. At this point, I believe, acknowledge that it's a bit political. I'm not exactly certain at this point where we know the curve is flattening. I'm not certain what a 60-day freeze on certain immigrants will necessarily do.
How about the guest workers? We're still letting guest workers in because we need them to harvest the crops here.
Well, the business executives prevailed on the president not to include them because they need him. So, I mean, it's a gratuitous slap at immigrants in general, and a gift to his base, which thinks they got a big gift when they really just got a little piece of coal in a
Tom, look, what are we talking about? And Eleanor's been talking about, and Clarence has been talking about, we all have, about Donald Trump. Where is Barack Obama used to lead from behind. Where is the Democratic leader who now leads from his basement?
But Pat, let me
Where is Joe?
But Pat, isn't Joe Biden, even though he may be in his basement pontificating on whatever, he is doing well in the polls. I mean, the polls suggest that there's been a Biden basement bump.
Tom, as I've sought to instruct you for a long time here now, this election is about Donald Trump. I agree. It's going to be about the coronavirus, how he handled it. Nobody is perfect on it. Did he move quickly enough? How does it look, frankly, in November? Are we in a second wave? And if he can say, I led the country through the worst economic crisis and the worst flu crisis and the worst pandemic in history, and we're now moving forward, he's got a better case to make, I think, than the guy in the basement.
I want to go back to this notion, the hiding in the basement and turning this into some test of virility, go out there and really prove yourself. What the president is telling his protesters is to go out there and risk their lives. Donald Trump is talking about holding rallies this summer. Let's see if he can deliver on that. This is irresponsible talk. Biden is doing local media in the swing states. He is leading 7 to 9 points nationally, but that really doesn't mean anything because the race will be won in 6 or 8 swing states. And he's doing local media there and talk shows. And Pat, you've sold books. How do you get to the people? You do all these talk shows. He's in his basement, which is a responsible place to be.
Joe's been on TV. You just haven't seen him, Pat. He's been on late night television and any other shows that he can get booked onto these days. But it's true that the incumbent president is absorbing all the airtime, airspace out there, if you will.
There's still a little time left for Joe.
All right. Let me ask Shermichael a question here. Shermichael, one of the things I've been thinking about here is that as we progress through the summer and potentially into the fall with this, second surge of cases, do you think there's a possibility of a coming generational divide? Do you think there's a potential where younger Americans say, actually, you know what? Enough is enough. We are going out because 3 or 4 months of this stuff is too much, and I'm in poverty and I'm depressed, or whatever it might be.
Yeah, no, Tom, a lot of millennials are struggling to buy homes because they're still paying college debt. As we know, data indicates a lot of millennials after college have moved back in with their parents. We're getting married later on, we're having kids later on. And again, it all points back to economics. However, I'm not necessarily certain, Tom, that those millennials will turn out in droves for former Vice President Biden, because the reality is all data should suggest that they're not very excited about the former vice president. And that's why I think whomever he decides to choose as his running mate will play a pivotal role going into November in regards to encouraging those millennials and younger voters who are frankly more excited about Bernie Sanders to potentially turn out for Joe Biden. Younger voters aren't always reliable voters. And so if I'm the vice president and I'm advising him, I would say you need to choose someone to excite this group. Otherwise, you may have a very difficult time beating the president in November.
Paris, do you think Stacey Abrams is that person? You know, do you
Oh,
think
Stacey Abrams
pushing hard for it?
Well, she's a very impressive candidate or a potential candidate. A lot of folks are screaming for Stacey. At the same time, though, I've learned from experience in my long life that you cannot rely on the running mate to carry the ticket. People who spend day and night trying to decide who's going to be the perfect running mate, and they get into fist fights over it. But it doesn't make a difference.
This virus discriminates. It kills folks in old folks' homes. It kills folks who are elderly with preconditions. It goes after doctors and nurses. It goes after urbanized people more than rural people. And I agree with you, the young are the most likely to start protesting and rebelling the longer it goes on, because there's a certain sense, that they're invincible and invulnerable. But these are the pressures you're exactly describing that I think are coming to the fore. And again, they are not dominant now. I agree with Eleanor there, but they're going to grow and grow and grow. And the country is going to demand, we're going to throw these shackles off. After all, if we lost as many men as we did in Vietnam, we didn't shut down the country during Vietnam or during World War II or even during the Civil War.
I don't see any demand to throw off the shackles. I do see a lot of demand to get testing out there, to make it convenient so that our policymakers and our healthcare providers can know what they're dealing with. Right now, we're flying blind. I think we're getting there. There are a lot of good people working on therapeutic drugs and vaccines. I think the polls show a great reluctance to open up the economy without some sense that that you got some measure of safety out there. So I think we're good through May. I think the pressure starts building in June and July, but I don't see any large scale events until next year. And I think I'm actually amazed how people adapt. Wearing a mask is like commonplace now when you go out. And if you had told me that would be the case, even a month ago, I wouldn't have believed it. So I think people are showing, great resilience and understanding of how potentially lethal this virus is.
Okay. All right. Exit question very quickly, just a number, 1 to 10. 1 being the likelihood that the books behind me represent a manifest improvement on or a manifestly larger library than Pat Buchanan's library, and 10 being the certainty that the president is thinking about the chances of his re-election at the moment. Pat, 1 to 10, how likely is it Stacey Abrams is the Democratic VP nominee?
I would put 5 to 10% at most. I think the senator from California would be pretty much offended if they picked Stacey Abrams over her, given her background.
Only time for the numbers. Eleanor.
Yeah, I think the notion that she could be an instant president is not necessarily a given. I would put it a 4.
Okay. Clarence?
Yeah, I would give it a 5. I think your heart's in the right place, Tom. The fact is that a woman would be great on the ticket, and by the way, promise that, and a person of color, especially Black voters, are so key to Democratic success that it would be great for Biden to have somebody visibly representing that.
Okay, sure, Michael, very quick.
I would say 4, Tom, because my question is, who is Stacey Abrams' base? Unlike Kamala Harris, she hasn't proven herself on a national stage as of yet.
Okay, I'm going to say a 7. All right, predictions. Pat?
There's going to be a battle over the state bailouts and the mayoral bailouts, but I do think that the President of the United States, because He's going to have to run in a lot of states that we're going to be looking at that money. I think he's ambivalent about it now. I'm not sure Mitch McConnell's going to win this battle.
Okay, Eleanor.
I think this is a time to reimagine government. And I think Andrew Cuomo has really hit on something with his 3 Bs, build, bigger, and better. And he's actually employed Kinsey, Pete Buttigieg's former employer, to help him think through what government will look like coming out of the other end of this.
Okay, Shermichael.
I'm going to say, Tom, that if we're still in this predicament where people are under stay-at-home orders by July, I think you're going to see a significant movement from the American people demanding a secondary stimulus from the federal government to help keep them afloat.
All right, Clarence.
I'm going to say, Tom, that the big fuss that President Trump and the right-wing media have made about chloroquine as being some kind of a miracle drug is going to fade. Early indications are that it is not the miracle drug that it has hoped for, and may actually be dangerous, according to a VA study. I think we're going to see, in fact, President Trump will just kind of stop talking about it so much.
Okay, I predict that President Vladimir Putin of Russia will see some of the lowest poll ratings, if not the lowest poll ratings of his presidency, due to public dissatisfaction in Russia over his handling of the crisis. Thank you for joining us. Again, we hope you and your families are staying well and that you'll join us again next week.